When your greatest battle isn't with your mother, it's with the voice she left behind. Most people spend their entire lives believing that the greatest obstacle standing between them and peace exists somewhere outside of themselves. They point to difficult childhoods, broken relationships, toxic workplaces, unfair treatment, or painful family histories as the source of everything that's going wrong. While those experiences absolutely leave their mark, there's a deeper truth that very few people are willing to confront. The real prison isn't always built by what happened to us. More often than not, it's built by what we continue to carry long after those moments have passed. It's amazing how someone can physically leave your life while still occupying permanent space inside your mind. Years pass, decades pass. People move to different cities, different countries, build careers, raise families, and even become grandparents. Yet they're still emotionally reacting to conversations that ended 40 years ago. They're still trying to earn approval from people who may never give it. They're still chasing a version of love that never arrived when it was needed most. The body grows older, but the wounded child inside never receives the message that is finally safe. That's why so many adults look successful on the outside while privately living in emotional survival mode. They've mastered paying bills, maintaining careers, and carrying responsibilities. Yet they've never truly learned how to care for the frightened parts of themselves that were formed during childhood. Instead, they've become experts at hiding the pain beneath productivity. They've mistaken constant movement for healing, when in reality, they've simply become very efficient at running from themselves. One of the greatest misunderstandings about emotional healing is believing that it begins by changing someone else. Many people secretly wait for the apology that never comes, the conversation that never happens, or the acknowledgement they've deserved their entire lives. They believe peace will finally arrive once another person admits they were wrong. But that's placing the keys of your emotional freedom into someone else's hands. That's a dangerous bargain because it allows another person's silence to dictate the quality of your life. Real healing begins the moment you recognize that your greatest struggle may no longer be with another person at all. It's with the invisible voice they've left behind. It's the internal dialogue that criticizes every mistake, questions every success, and convinces you that you are somehow never enough. Until that voice is challenged, every relationship, every opportunity, and every dream becomes filtered through wounds that should have been examined years ago instead of silently obeyed. The invisible parent living inside your mind. Many people assume that childhood ends when they become adults. Legally, that's true. Psychologically, it's often far from reality. Childhood continues every single day through the beliefs, emotional reactions, fears, and expectations we unknowingly carry into adulthood. The child may have grown taller, become stronger, earned degrees, raised children, or accumulated wealth. But the emotional programming established during those early years often continues operating in the background like software that never received an update. That's why two people can experience the exact same event while responding in completely different ways. One person hears criticism and sees an opportunity to improve. Another hears criticism and immediately feels worthless. One person experiences rejection and simply moves forward. Another experiences rejection and feels as though their entire identity has been destroyed. The difference usually isn't the event itself. It's the emotional lens through which that event is being interpreted. Many of those lenses were created before we were even old enough to understand what was happening around us. Every expression, every silence, every encouraging word, every harsh criticism, every embrace that was given or withheld slowly became a part of the blueprint that shaped how we see ourselves. Those moments accumulated quietly, eventually becoming the internal voice many people mistake for their own personality. That's why so many adults continue searching for someone who can finally make them feel complete. They enter friendships expecting rescue. They enter romantic relationships searching for emotional replacement. They look to employers for validation, religious leaders for certainty, or strangers on social media for approval. They keep believing that someone outside of themselves will finally provide the emotional security they never fully developed within. But here's where the cycle becomes dangerous. No human being can permanently satisfy a wound that was never properly acknowledged in the first place. Temporary comfort may feel like healing, but it's often nothing more than emotional anesthesia. Once the excitement fades, the same emptiness quietly returns, demanding another relationship, another achievement, another distraction, or another source of validation. The cycle repeats because the true issue was never addressed. When the search for approval becomes a way of life. Approval can become one of the most addictive substances a person ever consumes. Unlike alcohol or drugs, nobody warns you about its side effects because society often rewards people who constantly seek acceptance. They are called dependable. They are called selfless. They're praised for always putting everyone else first. But beneath that image often lives someone who's terrified of disappointing others because somewhere deep inside, they learned that love had conditions attached to it. People trapped inside this pattern become masters at reading the emotions of everyone around them while remaining completely disconnected from their own. They know when everyone else is uncomfortable, upset, disappointed, or angry, yet they have no idea what they're personally feeling because they've spent decades ignoring themselves. They've become emotional caretakers for everyone except the one person who desperately needs their attention. This creates relationships built on performance instead of authenticity. Instead of asking themselves what they truly want, they ask what will keep everyone else happy. Instead of establishing healthy boundaries, they become experts at self-sacrifice. Instead of expressing disappointment, they swallow it until resentment quietly begins poisoning every interaction they have. On the surface, they appear generous, but privately, they're exhausted from carrying emotional burdens that were never theirs to begin with. The frightening part is that many people eventually forget who they are beneath all of that performance. They become so accustomed to pleasing others that they lose contact with their own voice. Their opinions become borrowed. Their dreams become postponed. Their identity becomes shaped by everyone else's expectations instead of their own convictions. Eventually, they wake up one day wondering why life feels so empty, despite having spent years doing everything they believe they were supposed to do. That moment of realization can feel devastating, but it can also become the beginning of genuine freedom. The first step isn't blaming your past forever, nor is it pretending your past never mattered. It's honestly acknowledging how those early experiences may still be influencing your present decisions. Once you recognize the pattern, it no longer has to remain your master. Awareness doesn't erase the wound overnight, but it finally gives you the opportunity to stop repeating it. Breaking loyalty to the pain you inherited. One of the greatest emotional traps isn't hatred, anger, or even resentment. It's loyalty. Not the kind of loyalty that strengthens families and builds healthy relationships, but the invisible loyalty that quietly convinces us we must continue carrying emotional burdens that were never ours to keep. It's a form of emotional inheritance that becomes so deeply woven into our identity that we mistake it for love. Without realizing it, many people spend decades protecting the very pain that has been holding them back, believing that moving beyond it somehow dishonors the people who came before them. That's why so many individuals unknowingly sabotage their own happiness just as life begins opening new doors. Every opportunity for peace is interrupted by guilt. Every major accomplishment feels strangely uncomfortable. Every step toward emotional freedom is met by an internal resistance that whispers, "Who do you think you are?" It isn't logic speaking, it's conditioning. Somewhere deep within, an old emotional agreement still exists, convincing us that if our parents struggled, then we shouldn't experience a life that's emotionally richer than theirs. That's not a conscious decision. It's a survival pattern that quietly follows us into adulthood. The tragedy is that many people confuse carrying another person's suffering with honoring their life. But those are two completely different things. Honoring the sacrifices of those who raised you doesn't require repeating their disappointments or reliving their emotional wounds. No loving parent would genuinely want their children to inherit every fear, insecurity, and limitation they endured. Real love has always wanted the next generation to travel farther, live wiser, and experience more peace than the last. That's how families evolve. That's how emotional chains are finally broken. Breaking that invisible loyalty often feels uncomfortable because it forces us to release an identity we've carried for most of our lives. We begin realizing that our greatest responsibility isn't preserving inherited pain, but transforming it. The hardships of previous generations may explain how we arrived here, but they don't have to determine where we go next. That's where emotional courage begins. It begins the moment we stop confusing suffering with faithfulness and recognize that healing ourselves may be one of the greatest gifts we could ever give to those who came before us. The greatest prison has no walls. Some of the strongest prisons on earth have no concrete walls, no steel bars, and no locked doors. They are constructed inside the human mind, built one experience at a time until they become almost impossible to recognize. A person can travel around the world, achieve financial success, raise a family, and appear completely fulfilled while still living inside emotional confinement. That's because invisible prisons don't restrict our movement. They restrict our beliefs about ourselves. Many of those beliefs are formed long before we had the maturity to question them. As children, we naturally interpreted everything through the lens of our own worth. If affection seemed inconsistent, we assumed something was wrong with us. If approval had to be earned, we concluded that love itself was conditional. If criticism outweighed encouragement, we quietly accepted the belief that we were somehow never enough. Those conclusions rarely disappear on their own. Instead, they grow alongside us, quietly influencing every relationship, every opportunity, and every important decision we make. The unfortunate reality is that countless adults are still responding to life through emotional conclusions reached before they were old enough to understand what was actually happening around them. They mistake those conclusions for facts. They mistake fear for wisdom, self-doubt for humility, and emotional exhaustion for responsibility. Over time, those distorted beliefs begin shaping entire lives, convincing people that happiness must always be earned, that peace is temporary, and that acceptance is something consistently at risk of disappearing. Escaping that prison begins with recognizing it exists. Once we understand that many of our deepest fears were built upon childhood interpretations rather than present-day reality, we gain the opportunity to rewrite the story. Awareness doesn't erase the past overnight, but it does loosen its grip on the future. That's where freedom quietly begins, not by pretending painful experiences never happen, but by refusing to let them define every chapter that follows. Stop searching for someone to rescue you. One of the most damaging illusions we carry into adulthood is the belief that another person will eventually arrive and complete what feels unfinished inside of us. We wait for the perfect relationship, the perfect friendship, the perfect mentor, or the perfect opportunity, believing that somewhere outside of ourselves is the missing piece that will finally bring lasting peace. While healthy relationships enrich our lives, they were never designed to replace the emotional foundation we must eventually build within ourselves. That's why so many relationships collapse beneath unrealistic expectations. We unknowingly ask spouses, friends, employers, and even our own children to heal wounds they didn't create. We expect them to supply emotional security that was never fully established during our earliest years. When they inevitably fall short of those impossible expectations, disappointment sets in. Not because they failed us, but because we were asking them to perform a task that belonged to our own healing journey. Many destructive relationship patterns begin exactly this way. Some people repeatedly choose partners who neglect them because neglect feels familiar. Others remain in unhealthy environments because chaos has become emotionally recognizable. Still others constantly sacrifice themselves to earn approval that never fully satisfies. The faces may change, but the emotional pattern remains remarkably consistent until it's finally recognized and challenged. The remarkable thing about genuine healing is that it gradually removes the desperate need for rescue. As we learn to validate ourselves, establish healthy boundaries, and accept our own worth, we stop begging for permission to exist. We stop shrinking ourselves to accommodate people who refuse to appreciate us. We stop performing for performance because we finally understand that our value isn't determined by another person's ability to recognize it. That's when relationships become partnerships instead of emotional lifeboats. Becoming the person you needed. Healing isn't about pretending childhood never happened, nor is it about erasing painful memories from existence. Those experiences will always remain part of our story. The difference is that they no longer have to become the authors of our future. Emotional maturity begins when we decide to give ourselves the understanding, patience, compassion, and stability we once searched for in everyone else. Many of us carry an internal voice that sounds remarkably familiar. It's the voice that magnifies every mistake, dismisses every accomplishment, and insists that nothing we do will ever be enough. Because we've listened to it for so many years, we often mistake it for our own thoughts. In reality, much of that inner criticism was learned long ago through repeated experiences that shaped how we eventually learned to speak to ourselves. Fortunately, learned voices can also be unlearned. Every time we choose patience over self-condemnation, healthy boundaries over people-pleasing, or honest self-reflection over endless self-punishment, we begin rewriting that internal conversation. We stop measuring ourselves through yesterday's wounds and begin evaluating ourselves through today's growth. That's not denial, it's emotional responsibility. Becoming the person you once needed is one of the greatest acts of healing imaginable. It means offering yourself encouragement instead of constant criticism. It means allowing yourself to rest without guilt, to fail without self-hatred, and to grow without feeling obligated to apologize for becoming healthier than your past. That's not rebellion against your history, it's respect for your future. The revolution begins in the mirror. People often believe the greatest revolutions happen in governments, courtrooms, classrooms, or city streets. While those battles certainly matter, another revolution takes place every single morning in complete silence. It begins the moment a person decides they will no longer participate in the emotional patterns that have quietly shaped generation after generation. That decision may never make headlines, but its impact can echo through an entire family for decades. Every healthy boundary challenges an unhealthy tradition. Every decision to stop abandoning yourself interrupts an old pattern of emotional neglect. Every act of genuine self-respect becomes a declaration that inherited pain will no longer dictate inherited behavior. Those memories rarely feel dramatic while they're happening, but over time, they transform lives in ways that no public recognition ever could. The greatest victories aren't always loud. Sometimes they're almost invisible. They are found in the quiet decision to forgive yourself for being human, to stop apologizing for your growth, and to finally believe that your life isn't meant to become another chapter in someone else's unfinished pain. That's where real transformation begins. Not through revenge, not through blame, but through the quiet courage of choosing a different ending than the one you've inherited. I hope this has helped you. I hope this has helped someone. We all have healing to do in different ways. Check yourself out. I check myself out every day. And every now and then I find a little something that needs to be tweaked, that needs to be eliminated, that needs to be revised. So as I always say, I'm on to the next one. Much love to you all. LanceScurv out. Peace.